Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a former Vegas investigator seeks peace on a remote Montana ranch, he finds something else entirely: an iron-fisted HOA queenpin, threats painted in blood red, and a war waged in shadows. They tried to scare the sheriff. They forgot he is the law, and fire only sharpened him. When I first rolled up the long dirt road toward the place that was supposed to become my quiet corner of Montana, I remember thinking that the hills around Sky Ranch Valley looked like they'd been scraped straight out of an old western. Dry ridgelines, vast open skies, and a lonely 60-acre patch of stubborn land that had been waiting for someone just foolish enough to call it home. That fool, apparently, was me. After 20-plus years as an investigator in Las Vegas, where peace and quiet came in the same package as snowstorms in July, the silence out here felt almost artificial. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before moving. I parked beside the old farmhouse, stepped out, inhaled that cold morning air, and felt something that could almost be called optimism. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. She arrived before I even finished unloading the first box. A glossy white SUV pulled up like it wanted to inspect me before letting me into its territory. The woman behind the wheel stepped out with the confident precision of someone who hadn't heard the word no since middle school. Mid-50s, perfectly curated haircut, expression like she was evaluating livestock. "You must be the newcomer," she said, as if I'd already disappointed her by existing. "We like to welcome people properly here." I introduced myself politely. She didn't care. She handed me a thick folder labeled Summit Pines HOA Welcome Package, as if I had accidentally moved into a country club instead of a busted old ranch. "There's a mandatory initiation fee," she added. $3,500, due immediately. "And of course, you'll need to sign the membership agreement." She said it the way a dentist warns a patient that skipping flossing will end in bloodshed. I opened the folder, scanned a few pages, and calmly closed it again. "Ma'am, my land isn't part of Summit Pines. You don't manage this property nor that road." Her lips tightened like I had slapped her with a tax audit. She pointed at the dirt path leading to my barn. "That is a community-maintained road. You cannot use it without HOA approval." I told her the truth. The first half was county-owned, and the second half was covered by an easement recorded decades ago. My right to use it wasn't up for debate. The more calmly I spoke, the more visibly irritated she became. "People here understand the importance of unity," she said. "Being outside the association isn't really an option." Then she took one step closer, lowered her voice, and delivered her line as if she'd practiced it in the mirror. "You are either with us or against us." I had dealt with cartel lieutenants, gang captains, and politicians packed with more venom than a desert snake pit. None of them had the audacity to threaten me with a homeowners association. I told her as politely as I could manage that I had zero intention of joining anything, that my land was legally independent, and that I preferred to maintain it myself. "Summit Pines has a reputation," I added, "and not one that makes me eager to hand over a check." Her eyes narrowed to little glass beads. The smile she forced out looked painful. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts," she said, climbing back into her SUV. She drove off without another word, leaving a puff of dust and the faint but unmistakable scent of trouble brewing. The kind of trouble that doesn't stay politely on its own side of the property line. I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, staring down at the welcome packet she'd tossed my way like a curse. Then I dropped it straight into the trash can beside the porch. That was my real welcome to Summit Pines. It started with the truck. An unmarked white pickup pulled into my driveway around 11 on a Tuesday morning, the kind with a magnetic sign slapped on the door reading Westbrook County Inspection Services. Two guys stepped out, one tall and wide, the other short with nervous eyes, and they looked around like they already knew what they were about to find. I watched from the front porch, mug of coffee in hand, leaning against a post. The taller one waved. "Inspection for fire compliance. We've had a complaint about the structure near your barn." I said nothing at first. Let them stew. They were clearly fishing. I gestured toward the barn. "Go ahead. Let me know what you find." They walked around like tourists at a condemned amusement park, pointing at the tractor's canopy, poking at the support beams with a clipboard, and muttering things like non-compliant angle and combustible storage. Proximity. I knew the setup was legal. I'd rebuilt the awning with county specs and filed the paperwork myself. One of them, the shorter one, lingered near the shed and quietly said, "Listen, no offense, but you'd be a lot better off if you joined Summit Pines. These little headaches, they tend to go away once you're a member." I stared at him, and he knew he'd said too much. I didn't respond, just took a sip of coffee and gave him the kind of look you reserve for someone trying to sell life insurance at a funeral. They left 15 minutes later, no citations, just vague mutterings about future reviews. That night, I noticed the first message. It was scrawled in red paint across the side of my woodshed, 3 feet tall, dripping like blood in the moonlight. "Are you blind? In the corner smaller, join or lose." I stood there a long time, flashlight trembling in my hand. I'd seen messages like that before, back in Vegas. Gang graffiti, warning signs, the kind of marks you leave to let someone know they're being watched. But this wasn't the Strip. This was Montana, and this was my land. The next morning, I bought 6 trail cameras, the kind with no glow IR and motion triggers, and set them up in a wide perimeter. I buried 3 near the road, and 2 in the tree line behind the barn. The last one I strapped to a fence post, hidden under camouflage netting. Over the next 2 nights, nothing. But on the third, just before 3 a.m., I caught them. 2 figures, both hooded, one tall and one slight, moving through the shadows like they'd practiced it. They parked a truck, no plates, down the hill, hiked up through the brush, and lingered near the barn. One sprayed more graffiti on the side, "Shane is next," while the other kept lookout. The footage didn't show faces, but the way the smaller one moved, the way she flipped her hood back briefly to scratch her head, was enough to guess gender. Female. Young. The body language, the gait. It all matched. The truck was a newer Dodge Ram, dark gray, tinted windows. The bed was empty. I took stills, labeled every frame, and stored backups in 3 different drives. I also forwarded a copy anonymously to the Westbrook County Sheriff's Office, specifically the tech analyst I trusted most. I didn't include my name, just GPS coordinates and a note. Threats escalating. Suspects may be tied to local HOA. I was careful not to reveal my involvement. Not yet. Not until I had everything. 2 days later, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just a printout inside. Sheriff or not, everyone burns. No signature, but I didn't need one. The next afternoon, I drove out to the county recorder's office and pulled every document I could find on Summit Pines. Charters, development permits, right-of-way agreements, annexation proposals. I found something curious, a failed application from 2 years ago to extend their HOA boundary to include several adjoining properties. Mine was circled in red pen on the scanned map, rejected by a 2-to-1 vote. One of the opposing votes? My predecessor, Sheriff Milton, retired last year, moved to Idaho. I made a note to call him. Meanwhile, I started noticing more cars creeping by the property. A blue Hyundai, a black SUV with a cracked taillight, a gray minivan with paper tags. Sometimes they slowed down enough for me to see phones raised behind tinted glass, taking pictures, documenting, testing my patience. I didn't bite. I simply rotated the camera batteries, adjusted angles, and waited. But the quiet wouldn't last. It never does. The explosion woke me before the sound did. What hit me first was the vibration, this deep, violent tremor that shook the windows and rattled the drinking glasses in the kitchen. Then came the roar, a burst of orange through the blinds, and the unmistakable crackle of something large going up in flames. I was out of bed and grabbing my boots before my mind had even caught up. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the sky above the barn was pulsing with firelight, like a flare dropped into a mine shaft. The tractor was burning. My John Deere, a monster of a machine that weighed more than a fully grown bison, was engulfed in a tower of flames so hot the metal was already warping. Burning diesel punched the air with thick, choking smoke. Sparks shot upward like angry fireflies. For a split second, I just stood there, rooted to the steps, staring at the inferno that shouldn't have been possible. Then instinct kicked back in. I sprinted toward the hydrant, cranked open the valve, and dragged the hose toward the fire. But the heat was too intense to get within more than a few yards. Even from that distance, the air felt like I'd opened an oven door into my face. Fire crews arrived fast. Benefits of living in a rural county where everybody knows everybody's address. By the time they got the flames under control, the tractor was a collapsed skeleton of twisted metal, tires melted into bubbling black puddles. I watched in silence as water steamed off the smoldering wreck. One of the firefighters, a guy I'd gone fishing with twice, gave me a grim look. "This wasn't electrical, Shane." Someone fed this thing gasoline like it owed them money. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, jaw clenched hard enough to crack molars. Inside the house, I pulled the drive from the fence post camera and loaded up the footage. The motion trigger had caught movement at exactly 4:07 in the morning. A figure in a hoodie and gloves, thin build, carrying a red jerry can. She moved quickly, like she'd rehearsed every step. She climbed onto the side rail of the John Deere, unscrewed the fuel cap, and poured until the can was empty. Then she stepped back, flicked a lighter, one tiny spark in the dark, and the tractor erupted like it had been waiting for the cue. Even through grainy infrared, the height, the frame, the posture, they all connected like puzzle pieces snapping the final inch. The same silhouette from the earlier footage, the same gait, the same furtive glance over the shoulder, a young woman. And small enough to fit the profile of exactly one person who had every reason to make this personal. I made copies of the video, encrypted the files, and sent them directly to the forensics division. No sender name, no commentary. Just coordinates, timestamp, and arson suspect female. Vehicle seen approaching from South Service Road. I wasn't about to contaminate my own investigation by admitting who was behind the report. Not until the evidence was airtight. While the fire department cleared out, I drove into town. No lights, no sirens, no badge on display. I just sat through a morning meeting like any other sheriff, listening to routine updates on road maintenance, budget numbers, and a livestock theft 2 towns over. I didn't mention a word about the fire. The fewer people who knew, the fewer who could leak it. But the leak came from somewhere else. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an anonymous message, just a screenshot. A post from the Summit Pines community page, written by none other than Karen Aldrich. Some folks don't know how to respect our community. Heard our stubborn neighbor lost his tractor this morning. Actions have consequences. Not a confession, but close enough to make my blood run cold. And then, at the bottom, if I were him, I'd think about moving before more accidents happen. I leaned back in my chair slowly, letting the words simmer. She wasn't hiding it. She was bragging, laughing, threatening. The next blow came an hour later when a former HOA groundskeeper texted me. The man had quit last week after disagreements with Karen. His message was shaky and full of typos, but the meaning was crystal clear. I heard her arguing our daughter last night. Karen said, "He'll regret not signing. Let him rot without his damn tractor. You didn't hear it from me, daughter." That single word narrowed the suspect pool from 20 people to exactly 1. I finished my reports in silence, walked through the station like nothing was wrong, and went home. The tractor was still steaming in the winter air. Its frame collapsed inward like a blackened rib cage. I stood there a few minutes, listening to the soft hiss of cooling metal, taking in the acrid smell of burnt rubber and diesel. It wasn't grief I felt. It was calculation. Someone had declared war, and they expected me to respond in anger. They were wrong. I responded by gathering evidence, one frame at a time. The thing about investigations is that they don't reward emotion. They reward patience, pattern, and the kind of quiet persistence that drives guilty people insane. Karen clearly expected me to come storming into her cul-de-sac, screaming about tractors and gasoline. She wanted a scene. She wanted a sheriff acting like a victim, not an officer. So I gave her the opposite. Nothing. Silence. Stillness. And the steady tightening of a rope she didn't even know was around her neck. I started with the truck. The cameras caught enough of its silhouette. Late model Dodge Ram, dark gray, tinted windows, no plates. But even no plates isn't really no plates. There's always a sticker on the windshield, or a dealership frame, or a reflection that shouldn't be there. So I pulled the frame into the lab and further enhanced it. After 20 minutes of contrast and angle work, a faint logo emerged on the rear bumper. Helen Motors, a used car shop out in Cold Creek. I drove there the next morning in an unmarked SUV. The owner, Helen herself, was smoking behind the counter with a look that suggested she'd seen far worse characters than me. "You got a Ram on your lot registered sometime last fall?" I asked casually, keeping my tone neutral. She squinted, blew out a stream of smoke, and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, she returned with paperwork. The Ram had been purchased by Evan Bristow. Bristow, brother of the HOA vice president, known around Summit Pines for 2 things: borrowing tools he never returned and bragging about knowing the right people. He also liked to loan out his truck to whoever needed it. The kind of man who thinks he's careful because he deletes texts, not realizing carriers keep records long after he hits the trash icon. I thanked Helen, made copies of the sales documents, and left as quietly as I arrived. Back in my vehicle, I ran Evan's name through the internal database. Buried in the noise, an old incident report from 8 years ago. Public intoxication alongside a minor with priors. The minor's name? Juliana Jules Aldrich, Karen's daughter. Small frame, light build, history of vandalism during late teen rebellion. 2 college disciplinary write-ups, 1 for trespassing, 1 for property damage. And a social media post from 1 month ago where she posed with a can of lighter fluid for a prank video. The puzzle pieces weren't just clicking, they were fusing. I spent that evening reviewing road cameras along the service road by my property. Most nights were empty, but on the night of the fire, the gray Ram appeared on 3 different cameras, 2 at distant angles, 1 close enough to capture the shadow of the driver, the shape of the head, the length of the neck, the angle of the shoulders. It was all consistent with a young woman. Then, at 2:53 in the morning, the camera facing Ridgewell Road caught the Ram pulling into Summit Pines. 30 seconds later, another camera pinged as someone in dark clothing walked briskly toward the Aldrich house. I packaged everything, timestamps, vehicle pathing analysis, height comparison frames, and handed it off to my tech unit. Officially, it was assigned to the deputy on duty. Unofficially, everyone in the room understood the unspoken rule. They worked it clean, untouched, unbiased. Nobody asked why the sheriff himself wasn't attached to the case. I didn't need to be. It was working itself. 2 days later, an unexpected break arrived. A maintenance worker from Summit Pines met me behind the grocery store, nervous, sweating through his jacket despite the cold. "I'm not getting involved," he said, eyes darting like he expected Karen to pop out of the dumpster. "But I heard something. It didn't sound right." "What did you hear?" I kept my voice calm, low. She was yelling at Jules. Said something about, "You should have worn thicker gloves, and next time don't park the damn truck where people can see it." And then she said, he swallowed hard, "He'll regret ever thinking he's above us." The man handed me a folded paper, handwritten notes he'd been too scared to keep at home. He backed away before I could finish thanking him. That was enough for probable cause. I spent the next morning preparing paperwork, warrants, digital extraction forms, search authorizations. I brought in the county attorney, laid out the evidence, and walked him through every step. He didn't argue, didn't hesitate. He just sighed the way lawyers sigh when they know a case will be straightforward and humiliating for the accused. By afternoon, everything was ready. I sat in my office, uniform pressed, badge gleaming, belt latched. For weeks, Karen had treated me like some outsider to be bullied into compliance. She'd threatened, escalated, broken laws, and laughed while doing it. But she had made one fatal mistake. She assumed I was just a neighbor with a problem. She had forgotten I was the sheriff. When the clock hit 4, I stood, put on my hat, and stepped out into the hallway. My deputies were already forming up, waiting. Some of them knew exactly what this was. Others would figure it out fast enough. We headed to Summit Pines. Not quietly. Not unmarked. This wasn't a warning. This was the beginning of the end. I pulled into Summit Pines just after 5 in the evening, leading a small caravan of 3 marked units. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the identical beige houses and overly fertilized lawns. Residents peered through windows and parted curtains like prairie dogs sniffing a storm. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know for who. We stopped in front of Karen Aldrich's colonial monstrosity, complete with white pillars and matching HOA president sign staked proudly in her front yard like it was a military rank. Her driveway was empty, but lights were on in every window, and a security camera tracked us as we approached. She liked to watch, so we gave her a show. I stepped out first in full uniform, Stetson hat on, warrant folder in hand. My deputies followed, flanking the walkway as we approached the front door. I knocked, firm, 3 times. The door opened slower than expected. Karen stood in the doorway, dressed in a pale blue cardigan, pearls like armor. Her expression flickered the moment she saw me. Not fear, not surprise, but something colder, calculation. She scanned the uniforms behind me, the paperwork in my hand, and raised an eyebrow. "Sheriff Marlowe," she said smoothly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Karen Aldrich," I said, voice level. "I'm serving a search and seizure warrant for this residence and the adjoining garage. Step aside." She didn't move. "Warrant." For what possible? I stepped past her without waiting for consent. Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, suspicion of conspiracy to commit arson. We'll get to the full list shortly. 2 deputies entered behind me. Another peeled off toward the detached garage. Karen's voice shot up like a kettle on boil. You can't just, this is my home. I demand to see the documentation. I turned and handed her the warrant. She tore through it with the same righteousness she used on HOA fine notices. Her lips moved silently as she read. When she reached the part about her daughter, her hands began to shake. You have no proof, she said quietly, venom barely contained. You're fishing. I stepped closer, low enough that only she could hear. We have footage, vehicle matches, testimonies, a conversation your maintenance man overheard, and your daughter's fingerprints are already being pulled from the gas can we recovered near the tree line. She blinked once, twice, then tried a smile, thin and forced. Well, if someone in this community did something, I certainly hope they're held accountable. Behind me, Deputy Finch called out, Sheriff, got a phone over here with deletion logs from 2 days ago. Trying recovery now. Another deputy emerged from the garage holding a large box. Gasoline cans, one still smells fresh. 2 sets of gloves inside, one small. Karen's face cracked, not broken, but close. I gave her nothing in return. No triumph. No anger, just silence and duty. A deputy approached me with a tablet bag. We'll need forensic imaging. Messages were partially wiped. Looks like coordination between Karen and a contact saved under Juliet. That was enough. I signaled the arresting officer. Karen Aldrich, you are under arrest for suspicion of criminal conspiracy, intimidation, obstruction, and incitement to commit arson. Place your hands behind your back. She recoiled. This is harassment. I am the president of this association. You were, I said. As she was cuffed, the neighbors began to emerge. Phones raised, whispers spreading like gasoline vapors. She tried to compose herself, shoulders back, but her voice cracked mid-protest. You're making a mistake, Shane. You think this is over? This community stands behind me. Behind her, I saw a dozen doors open, and none of them stepped forward. When they took her to the cruiser, I turned to the remaining team. Let's bring in the daughter. Juliana Aldrich was at home. She opened the door in leggings and a college sweatshirt, hair wet, eyes puffy. Her expression shifted from confusion to dread the moment she saw me. Miss Aldrich, I said. You're being detained for questioning in connection to the arson incident on the Marlowe property. She didn't even ask why, just nodded, didn't cry, didn't run. She knew it was coming. By nightfall, Karen and Jules were both in custody. My evidence team was processing devices, reviewing chats, recovering deleted images. One of them found a selfie. Jules in front of the barn weeks before the fire, middle finger up, captioned, should have paid the HOA tax, Sheriff. They sent it to my phone. I stared at it for a while, didn't smile, didn't save it. I just forwarded it to the district attorney. The case was moving, and it wasn't just about a tractor anymore. The interrogation rooms at the Westbrook County Sheriff's Office aren't built for drama. No two-way mirrors, no swinging light bulbs. Just pale walls, a table bolted to the floor, and the quiet weight of time. I sat across from Jules Aldrich, hands clasped, watching her twist a hair tie between her fingers like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to this planet. She hadn't asked for a lawyer. Not yet. She also hadn't denied anything. What she had done was sit in silence for 17 minutes, glancing occasionally at the folder in front of her. Photos, stills from the video footage, the fuel can, the chat logs. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice even, almost bored. You know what this is. She nodded once. Want to tell me why? Nothing. So I changed tactics. I opened the file and slid out a screenshot. Her standing in the shadow of the barn, middle finger raised, firelight in her eyes. Captioned, stamped. Located, I pushed it across the table. You think this was some joke? She looked up then, finally, eyes red and rimmed with defiance. It wasn't supposed to blow up. I leaned back. Let that sit. So you just wanted to send a message? She nodded. We were just trying to scare you. Mom said it'd make you cooperate. You weren't listening. You were making her look weak. And that mattered to her. Jewel let out a bitter laugh. Everything matters to her. She thinks she owns this entire valley. When you wouldn't pay the HOA fee, she snapped, said you were an infection. The word hung in the air. Infection. That's what they called people who didn't comply. How many times did she ask you to do this? Jewel hesitated. Twice. The first time I said no. Then Evan gave me the gas can, said it would be easy. Just damage the tires, dump some fuel. No big deal. And setting it on fire? She swallowed hard. Mom added that part. She said it had to be dramatic. Otherwise, you'd just laugh it off. I let that confession linger before sliding the statement form across the table. Put it in writing. If you cooperate fully, we'll talk with the DA. Jules took the pen with shaking hands. Next door, Karen was unraveling slower. She'd lawyered up, claimed political targeting, repeated the word retaliation so many times it lost meaning. Her attorney, a polished man from a Bozeman firm, tried to file a motion for immediate release, citing community standing and character. Didn't help that in the same hour we found an entire trove of digital evidence. Emails between Karen and the vice president of Summit Pines. Attachments titled Emergency Annexation Strategy and Boundary Push Proposal. One memo openly referenced involuntary compliance strategies. It read like a war plan drawn up by someone who mistook petty governance for warfare. More damning? A set of PDFs labeled Revised Property Lines, Confidential Draft, showing a proposed rezoning that would have swallowed my entire 60 acres into the HOA jurisdiction. One page was highlighted in yellow. A hand-drawn arrow pointed to my house with a single typed note. Neutralize resistance early. That was enough for the DA to file formal charges. We held a press conference the next morning. No theatrics, no gloating, just a plain-spoken announcement that two individuals, Karen Aldrich and Juliana Aldrich, had been formally charged with conspiracy to commit arson, destruction of property, criminal trespass, attempted fraudulent, annexation, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice. As I spoke, I could see the local news teams scribbling furiously, eyes lighting up at the phrase attempted hostile HOA takeover. It wasn't just a crime story anymore. It was a political one, a social one, and I, like it or not, was at the center of it. That afternoon, I walked my property. The barn was still scorched, cordoned off for insurance inspection. I passed the tractor's charred remains, nothing left but a melted chassis and the faint chemical stink of extinguished flame. But I wasn't angry. I was cold, focused. Karen had expected that fire to scare me. But all it did was strip away the last of my patience. And now that the evidence was stacked and the charges filed, there was only one thing left to do. Finish this. I went back inside and started writing my statement. The public deserved to hear everything, on my terms. I didn't sleep that night, not because of nerves, because I was writing. By morning, my desk was covered in drafts, legal phrasing crossed out, sections rewritten with plainer words. I knew exactly how this had to sound, not like some polished press release or a political stunt. Just the truth, told clean and cold. A former investigator, now sheriff, explaining to the public exactly how a power-hungry HOA president torched my tractor to punish me for not submitting to her authority. By noon, I had the final version uploaded to the county website and my own personal blog. I attached the relevant exhibits, video stills, excerpts of chat logs, and a scanned copy of Karen's annexation proposal with her signature. It was titled, Why My Tractor Burned, and Why This Concerns Every Property Owner in Westbrook County. It took less than 20 minutes for the story to go viral across Montana Facebook groups. 3 hours later, it hit regional media. By dinner time, I was getting calls from Denver and Seattle. That night, I was invited to speak on a live-stream town hall hosted by a statewide property rights coalition. The host, a grizzled rancher in a weathered denim jacket, leaned in after I recounted the last few weeks. You mean to say, he drawled, that an HOA tried to expand their authority through fire? They tried, I answered. And now they're facing the consequences. By the next day, Summit Pines HOA wasn't just trending in the county, it was a punchline. Memes exploded, a burning John Deere with the caption, "Don't join, you'll regret it." Others photoshopped Karen's face onto historical villains. My favorite was a movie poster mock-up titled HOA Wars, the HOA Strikes Back. And yet, the fallout was just beginning. First came the emergency HOA board meeting. With Karen and her daughter officially removed, the vice president tried to assume command, but his involvement in the forged documents soon came under scrutiny. I watched footage from that meeting later, people yelling, waving printed screenshots, shouting things like, "You knew!" and "We trusted you." Then came the lawyers. 5 homeowners filed independent lawsuits against the HOA for fraud, coercion, and illegal dues collection. 2 of them revealed that their fences had been relocated mysteriously by HOA contractors last year to match updated boundary expectations, they were told. One man, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, marched into my office with a crumpled letter from Karen dated 3 years prior, threatening him with legal action for having a non-compliant shed that was fully on his own land. I knew she was crooked, he said. Didn't think she was a damn arsonist too. By the end of that week, the county zoning board issued an emergency order to audit every HOA document filed by Summit Pines in the last 5 years. Turns out, there were a lot of revised maps floating around, most of them never formally approved by any county department. In response to the public outrage, the mayor of Westbrook, previously friendly with Karen, held a press briefing. She fumbled through a short statement, claiming ignorance of the annexation attempt, but the emails said otherwise. Her inbox was now evidence. A motion to begin a recall election was circulating before the end of the day. And me. I stayed quiet after that. Once the documents were public, once the fire had a face and name behind it, I didn't need to fan the flames. I let the evidence speak. I let the lawsuits build. I let the press dig deeper and deeper into what Summit Pines had become under Karen's regime. But I wasn't done yet. The county offered me funds to replace the barn and the tractor, insurance, compensation for interference with my duties, and damages from the civil suit. I accepted, but I used the money for something else too. I had a local sculptor friend of mine, Vietnam vet, blacksmith, and part-time mad genius, build me something special, a full-size John Deere 8R replica, out of solid metal, painted sheriff red and midnight blue, no engine, no cab, just armor. Across the front blade it said, "Not your HOA property." We installed it at the end of my driveway, right next to a brand new sign, "Private Land," under protection of the Westbrook County Sheriff's Office. I wasn't just rebuilding. I was planting a monument to defiance, to ownership, to fire that didn't scare, but sharpened. Spring settled into Westbrook Valley with that kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. Not just in the sky, but in people's voices, in how they walked, how they looked at fences and neighbors. For the first time in years, folks seemed to understand that property lines weren't just ink on a map. They were battle lines if someone tried hard enough to move them. Karen Aldrich was found guilty on 5 felony counts. The court session took 4 days. The judge didn't smile once, neither did the jury. Her daughter Julie took a plea deal, 5 years in a state correctional facility with probation stacked on top. Karen, however, refused to admit anything. Even in cuffs, she looked around the courtroom like she still owned it. The judge handed her 12 years, plus a permanent ban on ever holding any administrative position again, HOA or otherwise. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was out at my barn supervising the installation of the new tool shed and fencing system. I needed something stronger, more permanent, flame-resistant too, not out of fear, but out of principle. Let no one say I didn't learn from the ashes. The county offered me a commendation for exemplary restraint and legal integrity. I turned it down, not because I wasn't honored, but because I didn't want to turn this into a medal parade. I wasn't a hero. I just didn't flinch when someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. The lawsuits kept rolling in against Summit Pines. More than a dozen families came forward, families who'd been fined into compliance, who'd had sheds torn down or yards surveyed with fake maps. HOA membership dropped by over 70%. By summer, the board had dissolved itself entirely. What was left of it was under audit and under threat of more lawsuits. A few of the old loyalists moved out. The rest kept their heads down. The mayor resigned 2 weeks after the recall petition passed. One of her aides leaked the full email chain. Karen had offered campaign donations in exchange for the rezoning proposal's accidental approval, another felony charge, another deal cut. She vanished from public life after that. As for me, I made one last public statement. I drove out to the county fair, where they'd set up a panel on rural rights and private land ownership. A few neighbors were speaking, victims of shady HOAs, folks who'd fought for their land, and a lawyer or two. I didn't take the stage. I just walked up to the mic during the Q&A and said, "Your home is not a democracy. It's not a committee, and it damn sure isn't a favor granted by someone in a blazer with a clipboard. If you bought it, if you pay the taxes, if you built the fence and mowed the weeds, then it's yours. If someone lights a fire on your land, you don't ask them for forgiveness. You put it out, and you make sure the arsonist never gets to strike a match again. People applauded. Some stood up. A woman cried. I left before the cameras followed. Now, every morning, I drink my coffee facing east, where that steel John Deere catches the rising sun. It's already rusting in places, and that's fine. It's not meant to move. It's meant to remind. I still get letters, emails from sheriffs in other counties, from farmers across state lines. Even got a call from a guy in Tennessee who said, "Man, I thought it was just me." It never is. You just have to speak fire in a place where they only understand smoke. And when the next Karen shows up with a clipboard and a smile and a threat dressed up like policy, I'll be waiting. Not as a victim, not as a member, but as the law.